My audition for Vera Bennett. Okay. I was the last person, the last one to audition. I remember I had been overseas and I came back, and my agent told me that there was this audition at Grundy's, and I was to be there, so I went along. Fear and trepidation, you know what actresses are like when they go to these auditions. And I didn't know anything about the show, and I didn't know anything about the character. I just had one scene. So when I got there, I had long hair and it was out, and Ian Bradley asked one of the girls if they could get me a rubber band, so I tied my hair back with it, and I'd done the scene with the hair out, and then he said, no, we'll do it again, but I want you to pull your hair back. And so I put it in a band and I did the scene again, and that was it, really. Sorry about that. I don't recall what scene it was. It would have been one of those, what's going on here, clean up that mess. This is not a holiday camp. No, I don't remember the scene, but it was, I don't know, I think it might have been later that afternoon or the very next morning. No, Ian had to take it down to Melbourne, so he went with the scene, and then I think the next day they said I had the role.
Okay.
Of course, what happened is that he took it down to Melbourne, which I wouldn't put on the thing, and he showed it to all the executives, and they said, oh, well, the one with the hair outs is fine, but we prefer the one with the actress with the hair pulled back. I think she should, that's the one we prefer. So Ian didn't bother to say it was the same actress. So, I hadn't been out of drama school for all that long. I was so terribly excited and terribly terrified at the same time, because basically it was my first professional job. I'd had a small role in Glenview High, and I'd done some commercials, and but that was, I think I'd graduated in December, and that was in August. So I had to move to Melbourne, so it was very exciting and quite terrifying. And I got down there and I met all the cast, and everyone just seemed so right for their roles, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'll probably be sent back to Sydney. But we got starting, and we're doing 1 hour a week, and the director, Grace, we'll call him Grace, he was very good to me, and we went through scenes, he and I together, and the show got rolling, and we went on with it. It was it was a really special time. Poor old Vera, my character. She was a very complex character, but the prison was her power base. That's where she could really, or the only place she could really operate. Very early on in the episodes, you saw that she was looking after her mother, who was a bit of a harridan and who bullied her, and she really didn't. She didn't have a social life. She didn't have any social graces. Full stop. End of story. She struggled in the outside world. She couldn't dance. She didn't know how to dress. She didn't know, how to do her hair or her makeup. But when she put on that uniform and walked in and signed in at the Wentworth Detention Centre, that was where she ruled. And she had certain ways that she wanted things done, and there was no deviation as far as the prisoners were concerned. So I found it to be actually quite a sad case. And I think that the fact that an individual can completely and utterly lack a sense of humour in any shape or form. She never ever saw the funny side of anything. And I think also because she was in the prison, which was her area, the prisoners were there to be punished. She didn't believe, Erica Davidson believed in rehabilitation, Meg Morris believed in listening to their problems, and Vera Bennett just wasn't like that. She said, this is a prison, it's not a holiday camp, you're here to be punished, and she just went along doing what she did, maintaining law and order, And the prisoners were they were forever trying to get around her. How can we get around Vera? And that actually presented the show with quite a lot of humour, not from Vera, but from the prisoners. And it also gave them a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, because they lived on dreams and imagining who would marry, when they got out, would they marry? Would Lizzie Birdsworth marry Sid? Val, I think, mentions, has Sid got a brother? And, that they had hard lives. And they used to dream and talk and plot and plan, and I was there to interrupt those dreams and those plots and the plans. So in that way, it was a fabulously interesting character to play. But I also found her quite sad. And I also, I used to arrive at the studio very much Fiona Spence, and it was then the transformation. It was very much the uniform, very much getting into the court shoes, the lace-ups, and then by the time that they'd put the knot on the back of the head, the transformation was complete, and I could walk out onto the floor of Studio B as Vera Bennett. And it was a wonderful character to play. I think, if I'm going to be picky, I'd say that I got quite exhausted with not only letting out all the aggression, but also receiving it all back. I found that to be quite tiring. And we started off doing the show at 1 hour a week, and then it went to 2 hours a week. And I was, I think, in the show for about 3 years, so it was full on. We used to go to work in the dark and come home in the dark. It was... we started very, very early in the morning and would be there all day and go home maybe 8:30 at night. But back in those days, doing overtime wasn't as much of a... Well, they don't like doing overtime now at all. They have it really regimented. But we could quite often, if there was a big storyline, be in the studio until 8, 9, 10, 11. Sometimes they did night shoots that went all through the night, especially when the prisoners were trying to escape and get stuck in tunnels, or when they were putting on a pantomime or whatever, which I think was the forerunner to them all running out and escaping, which my character, of course, thought, well, I was vindicated, because they should never have been allowed to put on a pantomime, and instead of doing a pantomime, they all escaped from the prison. When we worked on Prisoner, there were some advisors in the scripting department for authenticity, both on pre-production and while we were in production. There was a woman who'd been the longest-serving prisoner in New South Wales. She was an advisor. And then a little bit later on, there was an ex-con who came in as an advisor for stories, and he... And one day, all over the news and all over the newspapers, was about this bank robbery that had happened in Toorak, and there'd been a shooting, and our advisor had been shot. He was actually one of the robbers. So that was life imitating art, and we were all stunned. We couldn't believe it. So, and then for research, just before the show started, we went more or less as a cast to Pentridge Prison. They were putting on a play there called The Last of the Knucklemen, and it was quite a violent play. And as we're sitting there watching it, I'm not sure that much of the violence that was going on stage was acting. They really seemed to be taking out some of their grudges on one another. But when we came through, one of the funny things about Pentridge was the beautiful gardens that they had. And I know that they reproduced some gardens at the back of Wentworth. There were people who loved to tend their roses or whatever. But the beautiful gardens, and then you go through into the prison itself, and it was quite a formidable experience. They were all male warders, except there was one female warder, and she was short and blonde, but she had black gloves on, and I found that to be, I couldn't believe it. She kept on fiddling with the tops of them, pulling them down, and that was quite scary, really. And then we went in to see the play, and that must have lodged in the minds of the writers who were with us, or the storyliners, because many, many, many moons later, there was a character called Joan Ferguson, and one of the things that identified her character were these leather gloves that she used to use, and for effect, and also as a form of menace, I think. Now, what would it have been like if Vera Bennett and Joan Ferguson had worked together? Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Vera was a stickler for the rules, and Joan Ferguson wasn't a stickler for the rules. So I think that they would have had some confrontations, certainly. See, Jock Stewart was corrupt, and even Terry, the prison officer that my character became engaged to, was not completely straight. I didn't know that, though. I wouldn't have approved of Joan Ferguson, the freak. But as to who would have won the battle, well, thank goodness we weren't there. Thank goodness I wasn't there. My character, she was safe up in Barnhurst because she was a pretty formidable character and very successful one. As far as romances, she did have a couple of romances during her time at Wentworth. She had a kiss with prison officer Fletcher, but that was very early on, and he'd separated from his wife, and we were working together, and somehow we went out and had a drink, and they did have a kiss, and then of course he went back to his wife, which made Vera a little bit more bitter and twisted. She had a couple of romances. She was used by a couple of men who needed to get contact inside the prison. She was completely straight and by the book, but people tried to influence her. She didn't know what to do. When Terry asked her to marry her, it was almost like she was like a stunned mullet. She was going, me? And then she asked a number of times, are you sure? You haven't made a mistake? You want to marry me? So she didn't have any social graces, and she didn't have any self-confidence. She had a lot of confidence in her role as a prison officer, and she coveted Erica Davidson's position as governor of Wentworth. She would have done anything to become a governor. So I guess when she was offered the job as governor of Barnhurst, well, she just had to take it because it was number one. It wasn't Wentworth Detention Centre, but Barnhurst was, I think that would have pleased her enormously, to be a governor of a prison. She'd reached the top, and then it wouldn't matter about her social life. She didn't really need one because she would be working 24/7. Yes, making the place run like a prison and not a holiday camp. Yes, I toured England. My one big regret about that is this all happened, we'd finished Prisoner, and it happened, in the 90s, a long time after it finished. I went over to England, and I did a prisoner tour around Great Britain. It was fantastic fun. It was a terrific cast. I went with Jane Clifton, who played Margot in Prisoner, and her little daughter, who was, how old would she have been? 3 or something, 4. That was little Molly Rose, who's probably grown up now. We did that tour. It was very successful. And some towns that we went to was unbelievable because the fans just turned out from everywhere. A lot of them dressed as what they term over there as blockies. So they were just devoted fans of the show. So they would turn up dressed as Bea or Frankie, and there were some dressed up in uniforms, some of the screws. In fact, there was a young guy who used to be dressed up probably as Fletch or one of those. But we got to know them travelling around because they were such keen fans that they sometimes followed the show around. And well, let's talk about the fans. I realised I'd never really thought about how so many different stories can come out until when we first were launching the Prisoner play in London. They had a press conference, and there were lots of people that came around, all with their microphones, and Jane Clifton and I were just telling the one story, what we'd been doing, the rehearsal, and then some guy at the back of the room said, are you married? And I laughed and said, no, but is that an offer? And everybody laughed, and it was a joke, and that was the end of that. Until out came the story. I was over in England to look for a husband. Well, that led to all sorts of letters, flowers, please from people saying, you know, could I come to afternoon tea, that I live at home with my mum and we'd like you to come and enjoy afternoon tea with us. And then the whole way around England there was another guy who sent me a single red rose every week. I never met any of these people, and it wasn't true, but they did get on the bandwagon and believe, and it caused quite a lot of humour and mirth when they were describing themselves and how they'd like me to be part of their life. It was actually quite touching. The fans were very dedicated, and they travelled from all over, you know, to come and see you in the show, and they brought presents, and I was actually quite overwhelmed because you do something in a television studio, and you live. I lived in Melbourne when I was doing it, and you go to the studio and back, and you in the dark, and you don't really know that you've got such a high profile, and then you go over to somewhere like England that's got 60 million people, and you're going right round the UK. Oh, it was very full on. I also went back to do some pantomimes, which were just such an experience. I played the Wicked Queen in Snow White, and I loved that role, you know, more of the wickedness. And I played the Empress of China in Aladdin. And sometimes I used to stand in the wings and go, oh, get to the cave quickly. It took quite a roundabout to get to the cave. But they were great. They were in beautiful theatres, and they were filled with people. And, you know, I was the Wicked Queen, so I'd be telling them that if they didn't behave, I'd poison their ice blocks in the interval somehow. No, they would go. I love playing to children. Yeah, there was one fan, Desperate Dave. He wrote me a 4-page letter, and I've not kept a lot of the letters, but I've still kept, and he signed himself Desperate Dave, and he always wanted me to communicate with him, not only in letter, but you know, through the television. I noticed that they do a bit of that in Boston Legal. They say, is so-and-so there? And they said, oh, if he was, he'd be in the premiere of the new series. They do mad things like that. But I couldn't speak to Desperate Dave on the television. And he was threatening to throw himself into the Thames, I think. Or was it the Mersey? I think it was the Mersey, if I didn't communicate with him. So I did write to him. But I've kept his letter. I've always kept his letter. So I hope he's well and happy and living out a terrific life in England. I was on air in 2 shows, both over there in the early 90s. It was both in Prisoner and subsequently I went into Home and Away and played Celia Stewart. So both of those shows were on, and that was quite an experience because I was very recognisable over there. And that's a funny experience as well, to be very recognisable, having any limos or any of the trappings of the people who are really well known. So you just had to scoot in and out of things. Edinburgh Castle was a place that people were running down after me. I was thinking, God, there's a magnificent castle here. This is what you should be interested in, not me. But I got to play, doing the Prisoner play, I got to play some of the great theatres in Great Britain, and that was a fantastic experience. All over the place, and the most magnificent theatres. So that was one of the bonuses, and there were many bonuses for being on the show, both personally and professionally. So I've got no complaints. One of the results of having the hair pulled back for all those years, and the fact that the knot just was from the lights and the hairspray and heaven knows what else was just dead hair and fell off at the end of the job, I can't bear my hair on my face. So, and funnily enough, a few years after that, when I went into Home and Away as Celia Stewart, she was such a conservative character, and she had an Alice band on, which suited me down to the ground. So I'm a bit old for Alice bands, but I do have a couple at home. I don't like hair hanging over my face, and I think that was a direct thing of having, because when I did before before Prisoner, I could have any hairdo, you know, and it was quite comfortable. But having had it off my hair for those years, I now don't like it. It annoys me. So that's just one of the things. And the same thing with I don't wear jewellery, which I loved my jewels. But because Vera didn't wear any and I had to take them off when I came to the studio, I left them at home. And then after those years, I never really got back into the habit of putting them on again. So it's funny little traits like that. If Prisoner was going to be remade today, who would I like? Who could I see playing Vera Bennett? Well, you know, any number. As I say, I've got a great admiration for the young actors that I've seen. One I'm really impressed with is an actress called Sibylla Budd, and I think it would be so different, but she would be really interesting to play the character. Oh dear, there's so many, I can't think. Well, it's not going to happen, so it's a hypothetical, isn't it? You know, do I have any advice for people coming into the industry today? I don't think they would need any advice from me. They're you know, so super talented and they're so super confident. If they were young and they were talented, or even, you know, just go and put your foot in the big pond. Go to America, go to England. It can be done. And there are so many opportunities over there now. So there are so many actors actually successfully working around the world that we don't even know here. And then they come up and it's another Australian. So there are a lot of people going, and I would suggest that they otherwise there's the other side of the coin, isn't it? That because some people have done a couple of movies here and then been taken away. But in this climate, I'd say go and jump into the big pond. Hi, it's me again. You're about to sit down and watch episode 217, and it's quite a traumatic episode. I think, yes, I have a gun put to my head. Speaking of guns, we had a storyline much earlier on where we went to practice to make sure that maybe it was around when the terrorists came, I don't know, that we had to be proficient in the gun. So we went to the range, which we actually did go to a real range, and we shot the guns. Not that I was that accurate, but... and then when we came back, Vera quite took to the guns. And I remember there being a shot of... you know, Vera pointing the gun straight down the barrel, which I remember was thinking, oh no, I don't think that... I shouldn't do that. That'd be terrible. I was thinking that, not Vera Bennett, but Fiona Spence was thinking, it wouldn't be acceptable to put the gun down the barrel. So I said to Lee Spence, I don't think I can do that. But he said, you know, it'll work. And he was right, of course. It did work. But I didn't really want to do it. I felt, this would be terrible to have this gun pointed at you in your sitting rooms. Anyway, speaking of guns, I hope you enjoy this episode. So there's so much more. I had a great friendship with, well, no, not a great friendship. She never had friendships. But if there was one person who had a slight soft spot for, it had to be Lizzie Birdsworth. She was less hard on her, I guess, and she was a bit more sympathetic. Not much. She didn't let much out, but she had a soft spot for Lizzie Birdsworth. And funnily enough, just before she left, before she was leaving, after Terry was killed, it was Lizzie was telling them, because she had just lost Sid, you know, don't make fun of her and don't laugh because it's not easy losing someone. And she was sympathetic towards Vera Bennett. But I thought it was summed up in that very last scene when the mouse had come in and given her a present, which she was absolutely astounded. I mean, she never expected anything like that from a prisoner, and neither it wasn't the way. It shouldn't have happened. But they were all going back to her cells, and she didn't even look at it. She just threw it behind her into the recreation room. So she was hard. What did her mother used to say? You're hard and... Oh, gosh, it was something I used to remember. I didn't think I'd ever forget it, but am I going to forget it now? You're hard and tired before your time, something like that. And she was a bit. She wasn't as old as she looked or as she behaved, but I liked playing a complex character like that. Not that I really. I was a lot more fun than her, but I did enjoy playing her very much, and I enjoyed all the interaction with all the other characters, and also working on the show. I had an opportunity to work with, I can't believe, so many people came to work in the show, which was just a great pleasure and a great working experience for me. And also, where would we have all been without shows like Prisoner, for just a consistency of work for women, which was another of its absolute pluses. I suppose I had the most run-ins with B. Smith. She was the top dog, and we were sort of wrestling together for control. There were times that she won. Oh, she used to gloat so much. Her character, if she ever got the upper hand, was just the worst gloater in the world. We probably locked horns more than any other character. And I really met my match when I came up against B. Smith. She was, again, that word formidable character, and a wonderful top dog. I mean, she really ruled the roost. She had so much presence and so much power and so much authority, all the things that my character imagined that should only have been with prison officers and not with prisoners. I don't even think that Vera would have thought about a grudging respect, but I can think now, in retrospect, that maybe there was a little bit. But it made Vera all the more determined that she got her comeuppance in any way. And I suppose it made... I think the fact with B. Smith... They were in for passing the time of day in the best way possible and getting up to as much mischief and putting Vera under as much pressure really made their day. They enjoyed that. And trying to get around, or so much manoeuvring, was how can we do this? How are we going to get around Vera? And by getting around, it created a lot of humour from the prisoners. Not much humour for Vera, of course, but that was a big element in the show, was how are we going to get around Vera? How are we going to pull her down a peg or two, or how are we going to put her offside? So they made for some fun storylines, and I admire Val Lehman very much as a person and as an actress, and somebody who always stood up for all of us and herself, and the thing that I wish I'd had, she could look at a page of a script. She had a photographic memory, so she just looked down and because sometimes we got rewrites and they could be late in the afternoon, and she'd already had about 35 scenes, and we'd get all these blue pieces of paper for the extra scenes if we were running a bit short, and she would look down and say, right, I'm ready. Well, I'd be poring over it saying, oh, not yet. The characters that were in the show. Well, Lizzie and Doreen, a prime example of two characters that were actually written in a minor sort of way to begin with. They weren't really even expected to stay in the show. But when it went to air, their characters and their sense of fun and mischief and their comic timing that they had together, they became huge. And Sheila was one of the most loved characters ever to be on Prisoner. So that was an example of people who came in that were going to be there in a minor way that really took the show to another level, and they were hugely successful, and both terrific people and good friends. And I think that's why the show was so successful, and it was phenomenally successful, and it was really, really nice to be involved in a show that was so successful, was because I think that they got the casting right, the casting of all the characters. I think that they got them right. And now looking back on it, I always preferred the show when it was in the prison, and now later on I still prefer the shows that were actually in the prison, because they don't age the same way, because as soon as you step out you've got the long broad the suits and the fashions of the day, which sort of didn't apply to the inside of the prison. From there to now, 25 years down the track, where would Vera be and what would be her story? Well, I don't think there would have been any more personal relationships, because that was over when Terry was killed. And she was a funny character. I wouldn't be at all surprised. I remember she went through wanting to be an artist, and she was so bad. So that was another thing that fell by the wayside. Where would she be today? Maybe a little bit of a dipsomaniac, a bit lonely. She wasn't good at making friends, and she thought Meg was a friend, and I think in episode 224 she felt a little bit betrayed by Meg, so she would have gone off into her Barnhurst era, feeling that she had nothing behind her, no friendships that she would have kept up. Certainly not with Colin Powell, who used to snigger behind her back. I always found her to be a sad character. I loved playing her, but I did find her a sad character, and I can't imagine that she suddenly would have turned around and had half a dozen children and had a very happy life. I think she would be alone. She was probably, let's put it this way, she'll probably be retiring from Barnhurst in the next couple of years, and then she will have, she'd have great superannuation, wouldn't she? Maybe she'll start travelling. I think she would. I'd like to think that she would find some sort of happiness, but if she'd spent the last 25 years at Barnhurst, I can't see much hope for her, really. It'd be nice to think that she would get outside herself and do a bit of travelling, but she didn't have a lot of self-confidence. She knew her job backwards, and that was her power base. She knew that. That's why she was a stickler for the rules. She was, I suppose, in a way, a control freak. And she had gorgeous people to control. I wish her happiness. Hi, I'm Vera Bennett. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, that was a slip, wasn't it? My name's Fiona Spence, and I played Vera Bennett, also known as Vera Tits. Vera Tits, oh dear, this is... Okay, I'll do that one again. My name's Fiona Spence, and I played Vera Bennett, also known as Vinegar Tits, and you're about to see episode 224, which was Vera's last episode. And it was an episode that was emotional to shoot, because I was very attached. I love the character, and I was very attached. It was my decision to leave, and it was only because I was really exhausted. And it seems so funny to say it, but I guess because it was my first big role on television, I became quite consumed with it, and I was very exhausted from giving out all that aggression, because that wasn't really me, and also receiving it. I found that very, what's the word? It's not tiring, I suppose. It was just emotionally draining, I suppose, would be I suppose that's what I could say. I was emotionally drained. Maybe if it was, maybe what I should have done was take 3 months off, which they would do now. But back then, the hours were long. I mean, some people like Meg Morris stayed there from the beginning till the very end, 7 years or however long it went for. But with my character, I needed a break. I think. So I left, and it was a sad day. But I went over to Greece the next week and had a holiday. And yes, I suppose if I had my time over, I probably could have had a holiday and recouped all that energy and gone back into the show. But that's not the way it was. I left and I went to Barnhurst as the governor, and that was a goal of Vera's from the very beginning. She would have preferred to be the governor of Wentworth Detention Centre, but Barnhurst was also a very good offering. So that's where she went to. And another thing about being original cast member of a show is that there's a great bond and camaraderie, and you know, we were all in the room together when Ian brought in, you know, a tape recorder and played the Prisoner theme. You know, you're in on the ground floor of absolutely everything that's going on. So he was a wonderful producer. It's a trip down memory lane because it was a great part of all our lives, because it ended up to be our social life as well, because we all got on well, and we were there for such a, well, 23 of the 24 hours a day. It took a long time to do the show, and we were all there, so we all played together and worked together, and I had a very nice friendship with Sheila Florence. It sort of developed towards the very end of my time there, and really continued outside the show. She was a wicked woman, but we had a lot of fun at our place and her place, and she was an extraordinary human being. She could be very wicked, and she could be very, very funny, and with all of us, she shared her life with us, and she also shared her death with us, which was a privilege and meant that we all completed with her. So she was extremely generous in that way, and she was extremely generous with young talent in the industry, whatever field it was in. She just was there. She did, you know, she used to do the student movies, and she would sit being an extra for hours and hours just to give support to young filmmakers. And I can remember I was going to Sydney to be in a play, and she wasn't at all well. And I can remember it was a rainy day, and I was driving out of Melbourne, and I was actually crying as I was driving out of Melbourne on my way to Sydney, because I didn't think I'd see her again. And but when I was away for 6 weeks, and when I got back, she was still alive. But I know Sandy Gore she was in London, and she rang and she said, hang on, Sheila, I'll be home tomorrow. And she said, I can't. So she died on the 12th of October, so in the early 90s. And it was too soon. She was 75, but we would have loved to have had more time with her. And she was an extraordinary actress, and a very generous one, and a lovely friend. So I liked that. My favourite storyline? Oh, there were so many of them. There were some that were absolutely riveting, and then there were some on the lighter side, like going to check around that everybody was in bed and behaving themselves, and Prisoner, and pulling back the bedclothes of Lizzie Birdsworth, and she had this little brown and white dog down the end of her bed. Well, I mean, I was shocked, and I confiscated the dog, and I can remember I was taking her, leaving the prison with the dog on a leash, and they were all the prisoners were calling out, "Where are you taking her to? The glue factory?" And I said it was unacceptable that it was in the prison, but I took her for a walk, and I actually became quite fond of this little dog. I didn't want it in the prison, but I was actually thinking that, you know, it'd be nice if it came to my house to live. And when I took her to the park, some people rushed up to me and said, "Oh, my dog, you found my dog." And so Vera was shattered yet again, because she'd given her little bit of affection that she let out. She'd given to this little dog, only to have it whipped away by its truthful owners. So that's another disappointment. And that gorgeous little Strudy Doody Booty Woody was my dog, Strudel. She wasn't well trained, so, you know, in the park, which took a while, they kept on saying, "Now, get her to run to these people." Well, of course, she was sitting beside me because I owned the dog. I owned Strudel. And she wasn't an actor. And it was Rod Hardy's script, and we struck a deal that I would get enough money for gravy beef and biscuits for the dog. So we did that, and I loved having her in the show. She was such a gorgeous dog. And I've now got 2 more Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. I've had them for a long, long time. They're my favourite dog, and I adore them. We were a very close social bunch. Do we have drinks after work? Well, I suppose there were 1 or 2. But we all lived a long way. Channel 10 was where the elephants go to die. It was not exactly in a city. So it was a long way to drive home. Mind you, there were fewer people living in the world back then. But we did entertain quite a bit, and we saw each other, as I think I've mentioned, socially. It was a close cast. And we did have a lot of fun, down in the green room, which was underneath Studio B. It was where it all happened. You can forget the idea of us having dressing rooms. You came down these stairs into our den. First of all, the makeup. There were 3 or 4 makeup artists. Amanda Panda was one of my favourites. She was only 18. Because I remember I was doing Prisoner when John Lennon was shot. And we were all in shock, and she said, and I was in the chair, and she said, and we were talking about the Beatles, and she said, who are the Beatles? Because she was only so young. And then there was the green room where we sat. There were orange couches and a couple of green ones. And then further on, Jennifer Carmen and her wardrobe department, and behind that somewhere was a little hessian cloth that you got dressed behind. And Jennifer Carmen was the most wonderful wardrobe mistress. First thing she used to say, she rang me up as soon as she knew that I had the role, and she said, well, what star sign do you think your character is? So that pretty much sums her up. She used to take us shopping. She didn't have to take me shopping much because I was mainly in the uniform. But if we had any logies or parties or anything on, she would just take us out and throw together some outfits that always looked terrific. So she now lives in London, but she was a great wardrobe mistress and a lot of fun to have around. So it was just one long room, and we spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours there, and days and months and years. So we all got to know each other very well, and we all actually got on fantastically. Sometimes people spoke to each other in a shorthand that families do. So, somebody could come down and they might think that people were speaking in a way that, but it was family. There was very, very, very few, and they always talk about, a cast of women, what's that like? Well, personally, I found it to be fantastic. The very few upheavals. And if there were any, they were sorted out like that. Women are very honest. And they were sorted out, and we all got on with it, and there's a great bond between all of us. I now live in Sydney, so I don't see the Melbourne people. I saw Colette Mann recently. She was up doing a play, and we had lunch at Sandy Gore's place, and Sandy Gore was in as the evil Kay White, and she and I are very good friends, and we're also card partners. Patsy King, who played Erica Davidson. Last Christmas I went to Melbourne, and we had lunch, and that was just terrific. So, yeah, there's a bond, definitely a bond between us, because we were all original cast members of the show, and that's something really special.